Alright, we're recording.
Hey, dude.
What do you want now?
What's happening?
What's happening, right?
So who's asking and who's responding then? Did we decide?
Well, you're.
Am I asking?
Well, I don't mind. You can do it either way. Why don't we make it into a bit of a discussion?
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so a few months ago we decided that we wanted to do some research, really to find out the truth about some of the topics that we work with every day. And we get challenged on, and there's lots of issues with how some of these topics are understood and used in the workplace. So we thought we might do some research, find out the truth about some of the subjects that are really important.
Sorry.
Right. Okay. So then we're just having a chat, right? Okay. So let's just do this in a just do this differently, right? So let's just say, right. So we've started, this research we've started on. I mean, it seems to be coming together pretty well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, people really seem to be interested in it, don't they? I mean, I'm not sure that we weren't ready for the real rush of enthusiasm, I think, that came from the organisations that wanted to take part. Do you think it's really because people know there's a lot of research out there, but they find it quite impenetrable?
Well, I think the problem is that a lot of the so-called research that's out there has got a sort of a rather tainted lens, because often it's sponsored by a manufacturer of some technology or furniture or whatever. And I think what we were trying to do was to get at the definitive truth around the particular topic that we're dealing with, because the reality is that people out there really are struggling, I think, to make sense of what really is going on in this space. And particularly people who have been around the facilities and the real estate world for a long time have been battling with this question about, what is the workplace's part in supporting or otherwise the productivity of workers. And so I think, what my sense of it is that we've kind of taken a very objective view, and working with the guys from Amsterdam, the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, we've been able to come forward with some things in a much more objective and independent way, which I think are going to be quite sort of solid and help people to take things forward.
Yes, I mean, I was amazed, I think, by how many papers there are out there, these academic research papers. And the guys, when they went out to look for sources for our first project on professional productivity, they found hundreds and hundreds of papers, some of which have come forward to be really authoritative and robust and give you some really useful stuff, and some of them are just people's opinions.
Well, I think that they came up with about 800 in the first instance, didn't they?
Yeah.
But
it's mind-boggling, really.
Well, not only mind-boggling, but you think about trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the process that they've been through, which I think is incredibly robust, in really looking at all that research and then trying to grade each one of the papers.
Yeah.
And then really look at the clusters of research, and then look at the degree to which there's a real correlation, if you like, between various different themes. And ultimately, it's like taking a big hopper of material and ultimately boiling it down to maybe half a dozen themes, which
out.
I think is now coming through.
Because it gets rid of a lot of the noise, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the more important thing for me is that it's solid. When people eventually get to be able to use this research, it's based upon a very rigorous academic process.
Yes.
So I think they ought to feel very comfortable and confident in going into their organisations and talking about the findings with some confidence, and being able to implement those within what they do in the workplace and leadership and technology and so on. Because I think what it's done for me, it's helped me to really kind of put into context a whole pile of things that have been bubbling around, and give them some scientific basis, which for me is what's been missing from this whole equation.
That's right.
Quite a long time.
And if you remember, when we brought the sponsors for the first piece of research together for the productivity research, they weren't hugely surprised by the findings from the original trawl of all of the research that's out there. But they said the really important thing is that we now have the evidence. So the things that we suspected, we can now, within our organisations, point to them and say, look, this is the way it is. It's been researched. It's been researched by lots of people in different ways. Now we know the answer, and we can work with that answer. We can look at the variables that are important to, you know, the things that influence team performance, team productivity, and we don't waste our time chasing the holy grail. And we can really channel our energies into the things that are really important with some confidence.
Well, I think that the other thing I think that's important to me is, of course, a lot of the material that we've looked at has been in, you know, very academic speak, very academic language, and I think to some degree what we're being able to do is to translate between the world of academia and the practical world. So the tools I think that we're coming forward with, which will help our sponsors and then maybe help the wider community in the longer term, I think, you know, are going to be powerful. You know, the guidelines that we're going to create, the assessment methodologies that we're creating, and also, you know, for us as a business, it'd be fantastic because we can introduce all of this thinking into our consulting business, which will, I think, make a huge difference between you know, what we're doing and what some of the other players in the market are doing.
Yes, well, that was the whole idea behind this research collaboration with the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, wasn't it? It was to try to translate all of that great academic work, but that work tends to be a bit impenetrable. It's written at a high register language that perhaps mere mortals have a bit more of a struggle with. And I've read a lot of those papers as part of our initial piece of work, and it takes me a long time to absorb the messages. And I think people in business, managers at the front line dealing with issues, they don't have the time or the bandwidth to try to wade through that sort of thing. So I think our ability to translate that into business language and practical methodology, hints, tips, guidelines is going to be really powerful and effective.
Yeah, and I think the methodology, that we've developed through this process, I think is very solid, and I think helps us to create something which people can really regard as being solid, solid foundations. And I think that's why the other subjects we're planning to do over the next 2 years will also benefit from the rigour of that process, to give people something which is really what we're kind of tongue-in-cheek calling the definitive truth. Which is, maybe it's a little bit highbrow in its ideal, but fundamentally what we want to do is give them something which isn't tainted by a commercial lens. Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of the things we try to do in AWA are to try and move the industry on. Of course, we're a commercial business, but a lot of what we're about as well is our belief that some of these ideas need to be explored in order to bring more benefit, really, both to individuals and organisations.
And I think some of it is about
what on earth is that?
Some of it's about noise. Some of it's about
noise distraction.
What is that?
A vacuum, it seems.
or somebody's drilling a hole in the wall or something. Do you know this always happens, doesn't it? Something like this. You always get this.
Yes, the room's really quieted down now, isn't it?
Yeah, it was silent. Off his bloody chair.
It was going all right, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. From the top.
I think we've probably got, we've got a long way down the track there, haven't we? There wasn't much more we would say, is there?
I was just going to say something about challenging people's preconceptions. But then perhaps the one thing we haven't mentioned is the imminent piece of research, which is the virtual communities. Probably want, since that's the next one that's coming along. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah.
So you've just mentioned the topics that we're planning to research over the next year. Perhaps I should, in Wes's words, play the dart laddie and ask you, so what are those? Remind me. My memory's not too good these days.
Well, yeah. I think we're going to be interrupted by this bloody...
You just have to get in as much as you can and between it.
Is it in the building, is it?
I don't know.
Outside.
It's outside.
Powering down.
Just on Grace Church Street.
Well, there we go.
You want to try it?
Well, I can't remember what they are.
Okay.
No, neither can I. But I think challenging some people's preconceptions is an important part of this as well. You know, we've talked about the knee-jerk reaction of some organisations in bringing people back into the office.
Okay, yeah, let's go down that route then.
Well, I
Start
was.
off.
I was.
Oh, right. Are we rolling? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. Anyway, come on, stop being stupid. No, come on. Come on. Start with that, preconceptions or whatever. Yeah,
Before you start, get a chair. Too much noise.
Yes, and I think
no, come on, do it properly.
an important part of it is challenging. I think an important part is challenging some of the preconceptions that are out there as well. And as you said, we're trying to bring some of the truth, or some more truth, into the debate, so that we can perhaps not encourage people not to just knee-jerk when there's a problem. So I think, you know, the next piece of research that we're planning on how to, you know, what do we know about high-performing virtual teams, for example, that will set perhaps the record straight, and put in some counterbalance to all of the noise that's happened since the Yahoo thing kicked off a few months ago, and people got rattled because they saw a big prominent organisation starting to hook all their people back into the office, and thinking that was the last word on the subject. Oh, well, if it doesn't work for them, then it won't work for us.
Well, I think, you know, the interesting thing for me about that is, of course, that change in any form is something which many people don't welcome. You know, a reasonable number of the population simply don't want change. So when somebody like Yahoo pops up and says we're taking all our people back into the office, and HP and one or two others, because, you know, we can't get the thing to work without them being all lashed up to the physical workplace. You know, inevitably some people out there go, well, there you go, I told you so. But actually, when you look at what's going on here, you know, fundamentally people have been working in a particular way for a long period of time. They become, you know, almost, you know, habitually addicted to doing things in a particular way. When you invite them to do things differently, inevitably, you know, you're going to, you know, find that some people would rather keep doing things the same way. In fact, you know, it's almost a human condition that is the case. So when somebody like HP or Yahoo or somebody pops up and says, you know, we're having everybody back, a lot of people go, well, there you go, it's all.
Yes, I always suspected that.
I told you it wouldn't.
I don't
fly.
think. I want my people in the office.
Yeah, but I think we can all see. I mean, the direction of travel with technology, people's personal needs, legislation, you know, society in general, is about doing things without necessarily being physically into the same place together. And so I think what we have to do is we have to learn a new way of accommodating that. And
accommodating people's choices as much as anything, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's giving people choices about when and where they work seems to me to be, you know, as well as anything else, a demand for.
well, it's a human right almost, isn't
Well, it is, but I think it's also that the generations now coming into the workplace have a different expectation for what work's going to mean for them, and the way in which they want to do their work and to do the best work. And I suppose that fundamentally, what we talk to organisations about is how are people going to do their best work. You know, you might want them all in the office, but is that the best place for them to do their best work?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just occurred to me while you were talking, if you said to me this afternoon, well, we're going to change the way we work at AWA, we're all going to come together and be in the office. After 16 years, I would find that an amazing shock to the system.
It would be an amazing shock to the system, and it would be an amazing waste of time. You know, the idea of getting up in the morning every day, trundling into some central place, whether it's necessary or not, is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so, you know, but then our lens is fixed in that way. Just as people are addicted to coming to the office and working in the office, particularly our addiction is in the other direction.
Working wherever and whenever.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think that, you know, the world has got to get used to this, and I think part of the problem we have is that really it's, you know, for the first time in the history of mankind, you know, in the last 20 years, people have been able to work in this way, And prior to that, people had to physically come together, or they used sort of very slow term communications and so on. And so most of the management rhetoric and most of the conventional wisdom, most of the management techniques are all based upon this notion that in some way we're all likely to be physically together for a large proportion of the time when we're working. Well, that premise is now out the window, and so I think, as a species almost, we've got to learn how we make things work with new understandings, new techniques, new skills, because if we don't, basically what will happen is we'll continue to head back to the Yahoo, it's much easier to get everybody around the campfire, thing, which is just flying in the face of everything we know about the way the world is evolving.
Yes, well, even within our own team, we're not a big organisation, but we have a member of the team who's never worked in a big corporate office, only knows our way of working. So it's very interesting, I always find, to get his perspective of the way he sees the world and the way he has some difficulty understanding why people are so addicted and wedded to the office way of working. Because if you've never experienced that, then you don't know what that looks like.
No.
So the more, perhaps we're going to be breeding more of that expectation in those people that are coming into the workplace.
I think that's true. I mean, I think this subject isn't just exclusive to that style of working either, because, look at most, even ourselves, as we're beginning to develop a global network, those networks are being founded on the back of spending lots of time on Skype and Link and things like that.
Yep.
We're not even necessarily having to be physically together to explore ideas, explore commonality of process, tools, philosophy. So, the notion of us having to be together would in fact, exclude us from being able to do that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I think the other thing is, if you look at a lot of companies now, there is a globalness to their work, and so whether it's dealing with partners or dealing with clients or whatever, the idea of just doing stuff within our own physical geography is increasingly challenged. It's not happening, and so these things that we're talking about, they're just an evolution of the way things are being done, and they're all of course stimulated by and facilitated by cheap and pretty effective technology, and that trend isn't stopping anytime soon. The use of video has been one of those things we studied many years ago, and it's almost free now, and it's available to you almost wherever. 4G is making communication on the move at very high quality, very possible. And so that underpinning capability isn't slowing down anytime soon.
No, and you have a very different experience when you can see people.
Yeah.
We've done audio conferencing for years and years and years, but when you can see people, you can see if they're thinking, you can see if they don't look very well, you can see if they look distracted or upset. You can, and you can reach out better to the people that you're trying to engage with if you've got that visual feedback. So I think there's a lot to be said for it from a human point of view, and to make sure that people get to know each other a bit more. If you can see each other, you're more likely to do the pleasantries and the niceties that go with the face-to-face interactions. We tend to, I think, when we have audio engagement, or audio calls, we tend to just leap in because nobody can see each other. You don't sort of look into each other's eyes. You don't feel the same way about the people that you're connecting with. I think it makes it much more human.
Yeah, and I think there's an awful lot we take for granted in our dealings with other people when we don't have that piece of data in front of us. We assume they're okay. We assume they kind of tuned into what we're talking about. And we assume that silence means either the call's gone dead or we're confused, but in fact it may be somebody thinking. And so there's a whole learning process around using those tools as well.
Yes, it's all around getting familiar with the different etiquette,
Yeah.
isn't it? When you're
Yeah.
in the when you're all together and you can see each other,
Yeah.
you can see if somebody's preparing to speak or they're waiting to jump into the conversation. It's if you can't see each other, then you don't know that that's happening, and if the person's not particularly assertive, they could spend the whole call being very silent, and then you think they're not very engaged.
Yeah.
Which could be entirely wrong. Could be right, but it's very often it could be just that they're waiting for their
moment.
turn to break into the conversation.
So
it can sound quite rude. If people just sort of jump in.
So in some respects, I mean, it helps introverts a little bit, doesn't it? Because there's if you don't know that the person is thinking about something or wants to could be brought into a conversation because you can't see what's going on.
Yeah.
You could just assume they've got nothing to say.
Yes, absolutely.
Interestingly.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Good.
Lovely.
Well, that's dealt with introverts then.
Good. That's them sorted. So the other bit we could talk about is the pin. What's the pin all about? What do we? What is all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So when we set the pin up,
So are we starting?
we've started.
Oh, okay. Can I get some coffee? Sorry, Atlas.
It's all a bit of form, isn't it?
They let them do this on Newsnight,
What?
Drink.
They don't.
They do.
Oh, they do. Yeah.
Give them a glass of water. Tell them not to knock it over.
Are we all right, Atlas?
Yep.
So when we set the pin up, I don't know, it was about 5 years ago now, wasn't it?
Yes.
We had this idea that we would bring together people, leaders around the workplace agenda from different disciplines, IT, real estate, facilities, or now the emerging workplace communities, get them together really to explore a bunch of areas which are really driving innovation in the workplace. And our perfect model was to have a very multidisciplined approach, wasn't it?
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. IT, HR, facilities, real estate, risk.
Yeah.
You name it, we wanted them all
We
on board.
wanted them all on board. And it's been interesting because, of course, what's happened, I think, is that in the main, the people who have become involved, or that is evolving now, it's changing now, have been the people from the facilities and real estate and workplace world. Which is great because, those people have got a good place in driving forward and leading this kind of innovation.
Very often where it comes from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's a space driver, there's a cost-saving driver, so it tends to fall into their lap to try to run with it. And of course, they can't run with it on their own.
So, but the nice thing I think about the group is that it's a good group of people who like to work together on things. But what I think we've done over the last 2 years really is to bring to it a rigour and a structure that perhaps was less obvious in the previous years that we ran it. So the framework that we've developed, our transition framework, basically sets out about 11 different aspects that need, in our view, to be in place in order to both make the change to agile working on a reasonably large scale and for that change to be maintained, because that's increasingly being one of the problems I think we've seen in our consulting work.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the program has been quite neat because it's linked very closely to the different dimensions that are.
You could hear these people.
They're coming out of the meeting room.
I hope they're not coming up really. You're going out the door. I hope they're not coming in
That's
here for
probably where all
lunch.
the water glasses were going. They're going.
I think they've come out of the boardroom actually. 2 seconds.
Go home.
Go and look at them in an intimidating fashion.
I actually very much what you guys do with the old screen. I dealt with my work protection for years.
and recording. So yes, we're going.
I don't know where we got to there.
You were talking about the framework.
Ah, yes. So you need to pick this up from you need to pick up from me, otherwise I'm just doing all the talking.
Well, it's hard to kind of get a word in edgewise.
You need to take it off me. You need to take it off me. So, come on, pay attention. Get this right. Okay, so... Yeah, the nice thing about the transition framework is that it's quite definitive in defining all the different things that you need, and we've used it a few times.
Yes, I mean we've been developing that over the last few years, haven't we? I remember the original project that helped put all of those components together, and we thought makes a fantastic framework. It helps people to get their heads around all of the different aspects, from building a business case, getting the leadership on board. Some of that stuff is really fundamental. And if you don't crack that at an early stage, then you're going to struggle throughout the rest of the program, really.
Well, I think the interesting thing for me is that the model itself, of course, there's a bit of it which is about technology and tools and workplaces and the kitted parts.
Yeah.
But the vast majority is more about how you create the power and how you create the clarity and how you deal with the politics, because I think what we're seeing quite a lot is that organisations, may have done some pilots and they might have applied the agile idea in some form or another in a particular division, and then they kind of think they've done it.
Yeah.
But I think pretty well all our experiences that's only the tip of the iceberg.
But yeah, I mean the pilots, we've often seen, haven't we, that the pilot is an end in itself. So we're going to run a pilot, and we get to the end of the pilot and kind of congratulate ourselves that the pilot was quite successful, but actually we've got no platform to take it anywhere else. So we say to our senior decision makers, we've run this pilot, and they go, okay, fine, so what next? And even though they may have given their blessing to the pilot running in the first place, nobody's really got any plan for how they're going to take it forward. It becomes really very difficult then.
And I think then, when you've then applied it at a reasonable scale in a particular division, there's a tendency to think that you've cracked it, and actually that the rollout into the rest of the company will be easy. But I think what I think we've learned over the years is that every time you enter a new power kingdom, tribe, if you like, you have to go through pretty much the same thing, because whatever learnings have taken place in a particular division, the division that you try to implement this idea and needs to learn it all from first principle. It might be a bit easier because you've kind of got some visual aids already. You may have got some testimonials, some supports, and some people who can talk and speak up for the idea. But fundamentally, when you go into a new part of the business, you're really starting from a fairly low level. And I think some of the teams, some of the leaders that we've worked with, have found it really frustrating because they thought they'd kind of cracked it, and then they've moved on.
Yes, I think the framework helps people to understand some of that territory. And certainly being a membership group, it's really important that those people can discuss their experiences in a confidential way within the group and feel supported by them. And very often they'll say to us, it's really helpful to know that other people are experiencing similar issues, and they'll learn from each other and learn some tips or some techniques or whatever to try to get around some of those challenging areas.
Well, I think the formula for each of the workshops is quite important. I mean, the mix of structure, tools and ideas and things that we bring to the table from our experience, hard-won experience, some of it, and the case studies that we were able to bring in from some of the...
Yeah, they love the case studies, don't they?
Yeah, and from people who are very... mature in their evolution in this area. So those two things, and I think some of the tools that we provide afterwards, to help people to use things back at the ranch.
Yes, checklists and just little simple tools like the organisational needs assessment, trying to encourage people to think about the opportunities that some move to agility might present to them, particularly because they're coming from a property and real estate background and discipline, they're looking at it very much from a space point of view. And if you only do that, then, as we know, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. So trying to engage with the business about things that are important to them.
Yeah.
Because I think property people tend to expect the rest of the organisation to see the real estate in the way that they do.
Well, do you know, one of the most interesting sessions that we did was because one of the workshops we did last year was about the interworking between IT, real estate, HR, and others, which was fascinating. Yeah, because what you find is you kind of think that you're dealing with three tribes, if you want. Each with their own language, each with their own priorities and objectives and culture, and disciplines and so on. But what you find when you break it down, it's not three; it ends up being about 10, because within IT you've got people who are interested in the desktop and the networking and so on, and HR you've got learning and development and paying rations and so on. So and even within real estate and facilities, you've got a range of people. So you end up with this really quite complex organisational language issue almost, in which to make this big idea about agility work, you actually have to have some pretty good skills in understanding what you're dealing with and bringing everybody together around a common agenda, which is. Which is a tough gig, really.
And that's part of the framework as well, is looking at what skills you need, what delivery team you need in order to deliver a project like this. It is multidisciplinary, it's multi-skilled. Where are you going to get those skills from? You can buy them in, you can second them in, you might have them on the team already. But when you've got those skills and that team together, then the initial work is to really help them to gel and to develop a common language, so that if each one were stopped in the street and asked, what's the initiative about, they'd be able to tell a credible story using broadly similar language and similar concepts, rather than the IT folk just talking about the technology enhancements and the property folk talking about the layouts and the different working environments. It's got to be delivered as a whole,
as a complete unit,
as an experience.
And I think the other thing that that we've done some good work on is around the behavioural change side of the equation, because again, that's always described as being the sort of soft and fluffy bit,
and it's the bolt-on bit at the end.
It's the bolt-on bit at the end, but in fact that is the primary issue, the primary purpose. And it seems to me that more and more people from within real estate, IT, facilities, whatever, need really to understand how that behaviour change science, if you like, works. And it is a science. Everybody talks about the fluffy bit, but in fact it's not.
It's not very fluffy. Stuff doesn't work.
It's hard, and it's very, there is a way of doing it, and there are sequences that you would follow, and there are ways you present things to different audiences, that help them to consume the ideas, because inevitably when you're dealing with large communities of people, large tribes, if you want to describe them that way, getting them to change their way of doing stuff is not easy, because it's too easy really to say, I'd rather keep things the same. Why would I want to? So the logic for change, the psychology of change, all those things are another area that I think we've done a nice job in the pen on.
Yes, and we bring in our notion of the case for change. So you have to be able to explain to people what the change is, why you're making the change, how you're going to achieve it, and how things are going to work. So that all of those questions that bubble up into their heads when they know something's coming at them, you can answer those questions, answer them definitively, to use one of your favourite words. You've got to be able to engage with people and paint the picture of the future for them, because very often people can't imagine what this new world is going to be like until they walk in on day one. But if you've prepared them, if you've talked through the issues, if you've shown them examples, then when they do walk through the door, they kind of go, oh, I get it now.
Well, I think 9/10 of the problem with this subject is being able to help people see that, and in their own world, in their own way, because everybody needs different things to help them to come to terms with some of these changes. And again, within the pen, we talk to people about the use of different mediums. the use of video, the
Yes.
use of colour, the use of things which touch the emotional side of the brain as opposed to the rational side of the brain.
Mm.
All of these things kind of help to make the process of change more easy, and linking that to power. What is power? Who has power? Who has power to do what?
Yes,
Lots
because all of those messages need to come with some reinforcement from the people that we look to for leadership. And
Yeah.
we look to for, well, if you tell me that's the way it's going to be, then okay, I need to get my head around it and I need to come with you. If there's no endorsement from people that I respect and follow, the request is coming from somebody in a different silo
Yeah.
for reasons that I don't understand, then I'm not going to be terribly interested.
It's not about it's not just about what is said. It's also about who is saying it. And that's what
Yes,
creates
that's
the
what I've meant.
creates the power in the whole thing. And the other bit I think that the pin has addressed. I mean, a lot of what we talked about has been about the lead up to change. The making the change, breaking the mold, doing things differently. But I think what we've learned and what we've built into the pin is quite a lot of thinking around how you maintain that change once you've created it. Because almost as soon as you introduce a change of this kind, or in any kind, the world changes. And so,
yes, absolutely. And I think that's why the group, being constituted of members who are at different phases of the development of their new workplaces, is one of the powerful things about it, because they're at different stages, they share those experiences. And the case study we had recently from actually not a PIN member, but one of our clients, who shared what they've done since they went live with their agile workplace. They've grown the organisation, they've taken the notion abroad, implemented it into offices in the US. How's that been working out? How's that helping them to meet their business objectives? Not their real estate objectives, but how is it helping them to deliver the business, to accommodate growth, to leverage the communication, the collaboration across boundaries, to address issues differently, because they're thinking differently and they're behaving differently. And that's, I think, starts to show people who have a functional discipline really what the power is. It's not about, I mean, of course you're going to derive some property benefits out of this sort of way of working, but it's really more about, this is a tool to help the people.
Well, I think the property change can only be the trigger. I think more and more we've recognised, I think, that the property changes, probably you're running out of space, or you're wanting to, look at a new building or whatever.
What other, have we covered all of the aspects of it? We've talked
think we've
about
covered
the
enough,
different
haven't
nature
we?
of the members and what we do in the workshops, and we've got tools. So yes, that's probably the only thing we haven't talked about.
Okay, so
Are we rolling?
Yes.
for some organisations, one of the nice things is within the formula that we have for the PIN is the maturity assessment.
Oh yes, yes.
Which, I think we've got something like 80 questions now within the tool, which assesses the degree to which the organisation is mature or not in each one of the 11 facets of the model.
Yes.
And so it gives you a pretty kind of definitive view of where you are against what we would consider in any case, good practice to look like.
Yes, I mean it's in a way it's sort of like a checklist of all of the things that you would have in place if you were going to be fully agile in your approach as well as in the way you do things. So, as well as giving them an indication of where they are against others, it opens up their thinking. I think it's just another aspect of the way you can look at the subject.
Just a thought. It wouldn't be a bad idea within that piece of footage to have a picture of the framework.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering whether probably you shouldn't just speak to each, very, 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 very briefly, speak to each facet within that model. Do you know what I mean? So we can give Atlas the...
Just wondering where I've got it.
well, you'll be on one of your slides, won't it, for the... Me, I am too.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, So we've talked about the transition model earlier on.
Yes.
Agile transition model, which is really, as we said, just a framework really of things that we know need to be in place in order to make the change
Yes.
at a space, technology and cultural level,
The people level.
and to, if you like, make sure that that continues into the future, which is kind of pretty critical if you put
Yes.
all this effort into making that change. So I think it's probably just as well if we can just explain what that transition model is about, and we call it the bricks in the wall model, don't
I've got
we?
it here. Yes.
Right.
Yes. It's we love this now, don't we? We've been living with it for the past few years, and we're so familiar with it, and it's very meaningful for us and very helpful for people trying to get their heads around what's involved with a transition of this nature. And I guess it starts with vision, doesn't it? You know, trying to encapsulate the vision of the senior leaders of the organisation for what they want the workplace and the way of working to be.
And why? You know,
Exactly.
and why?
Yes.
You know, what's the big why?
Because if we can't articulate that, then it's very difficult to ask a bunch of intelligent people to come along on a journey into, to a different place, and they don't really understand what it's all going to be about.
Yeah.
So I think that vision is where we would always want to start. We can't always. Depends on the nature of the organisation, but if we can, really is the best place, the positioning place to start.
So somebody has to have the idea, somebody has to have a vision, and then I guess we then move on to having to try and do some of it, to demonstrate it to the world.
Yes, through piloting.
Piloting, yeah.
Yes, and very often that's we're back to our evidence really. Where's the evidence for the people that are going to sign up to this and the people who are going to live it? Where's the evidence that it can work and work here? Because you can show people lots of examples from elsewhere, but as we know, most people in organisations will believe, and quite rightly, that they are very different.
They're different from our tribe.
Yeah.
Our tribe's different to your tribe.
Even within the organisation,
Yeah.
even if we do the same thing, we're still different. And it's an important human quality to believe that, to be able to have the solutions suit you in your world.
So the second part of the process really is about building the kit of parts off the back of the pilot, really, in many respects. So it's about,
the pilot's where you learn about what you need, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
what technology should we have in play? How should we organise our space? What change process shall we go through? What materials do we need? What arguments do we need? What messaging do we need? And you're using, and of course there's a learning process going on as well. You're using the pilot both to help people learn how to work, but you're also helping the project team and to work out how to bind their respective skills together,
To mesh it all together.
and to then take the whole idea forward in a kind of cohesive way. So it's a big learning thing, and sometimes companies will say to us, well, can't we just do this straight off? And the answer is you can, but you're likely to... And the answer is you can, but there's likely to be a lot of,
Could you just start that point?
Okay. The reality is you can, but you're taking some big risks, because what we also know is if these things go wrong, when you're learning, when you're first doing things,
people are going to lose confidence, aren't they?
Very easily.
If they see that things, if there are problems and issues and those aren't addressed.
Yeah.
I think very often, you don't get things right on day one. There are going to be kinks and things that need to be ironed out, and with a will to do that, you're going to be able to overcome them.
Yeah.
Whereas if things break, they don't work, then that bad news is going to travel faster than anything, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And the credibility of what you're doing.
Well,
will suffer.
you often, if it really goes wrong and you haven't managed it carefully, it can set you back years. Getting people to...
We tried that.
Which
it
doesn't work.
Yeah,
Kind of.
yeah.
So we've got, the second bit really is the building of the kit of parts, which is another part of our model. And then really that's something that often happens, under the radar a little bit. What often we find is, we'll find a leader whose team are interested in doing this stuff. Sometimes it's within the real estate function, IT, whatever. And they'll
Hang
to
on.
make another one.
Within the real estate.
Do you need, I think it's do you need a room booked?
Yeah, is it room B?
Do you have it booked already? Oh, okay, that's room B, yes, you can go straight
Yep.
through.
Okay, great.
The page we're going through the same. No, I may as
The
well.
peril of trying to do this in a public space.
Well, I suppose,
Okay,
I mean,
that seems
No,
fine.
I think we're
Should
doing pretty well.
no, we're doing okay. I'm just wondering if we should take the opportunity of getting some food.
Yeah, that's
Well, how much more are we going to be doing?
I think we just want to wrap this up, and
Oh
I think
yeah, no,
we
that's fine. Let's
and then
let's
we're done.
keep, let's keep going, and then
just
we
think we're
can.
going to have a few minutes till page is finished to context. That's all.
We've got
You were.
Just summing
halfway
up
through
the
that.
summing up the pilot bit, wasn't I?
Well, you're talking about the kit of parts.
Yeah. So we've done the pilot. We've developed the kit of parts. So we've got all of the technology solutions
Yes.
and spaces and materials,
Mm.
videos, whatever
Mm.
we need. But then that's often done under the radar. So perhaps with a unit that where the leader is particularly sympathetic to the idea.
Mm.
But of course, what you then have to do is to try and use that as a visual aid to try to
Yes, yes.
share the idea with people.
Mm. So
And
people
then-
can see it in action.
Yeah.
It becomes less threatening, less scary, and oh, I see what you mean. Oh, actually, it doesn't look that different.
Mm.
Yeah, there's real humans in here using
Hmm.
and working, and they're being effective, and
But of course, it's a stimulus for getting the other one of the other components together, which is the team, the cross-disciplinary team,
people that are delivering.
people who are delivering,
Yeah.
and also the processes that are associated with it. So the integration of the respective different silos processes, which is really important to bring this
Yes,
to
yes,
pass.
because ordinarily each one of those functions has their own way of delivering, their own delivery process.
Hmm.
And of course, when you've got an integrated project like this, you have to find ways of meshing those processes together. Because some of them are going to be reliant on delivery from others, perhaps at a different stage of
Yeah.
the process than they would otherwise be expecting, and it's kind of jarring
Mm.
a bit if they're not expecting that, or if they haven't planned an integrated process rather than just trying to shoehorn mine into yours, sort of thing.
That's right, and so the pilot can be used as a in a variety of ways to get all of that stuff together, and then of course once you've got it together, you feel more confident because you've got a lot of answers to the awkward questions you might have not been able to answer had you not done the pilot,
Yeah.
which is really important when you're trying to explain what this idea is to other people, and particularly senior leaders. And that brings us to the next element, which is about creating a mandate. It's very difficult for senior leaders to be able to give you a really solid yes, we'd like to do this kind of statement without they know what they're saying yes to.
Yes, they've got some understanding and some reassurance, and
Yeah.
well, it's real. It is probably more about understanding than anything else, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's and being able to answer their questions, because they will come out with surprisingly detailed questions at
Yes.
that level. We've found, haven't we?
And also linking to another part of the model, for you to be in a position to provide evidence that this is both a sensible idea
Mhm.
and it's not going to bring the business to its knees,
Yes.
and that it's being done by a bunch of other people, and that it
Yes.
has been done before.
Yeah.
And so that's really important as well, because if you want senior leaders to really get behind you, they've got to be very confident in your understanding and ability to deliver this.
Yes.
And to get the leadership, the very senior leaders on board with the idea, of course, it takes a little bit of bravery. You may need to take a little bit of a risk here and there in perhaps going, into an environment and talking to people who, pretty powerful people who can have quite a significant effect on your future if if they
Yes.
wish to. So there's a little bit of bravery from those who are wanting to take this forward, a little bit of courageousness, but that can be very rewarding, because you may find that you're in many organisations, as we do, when you get to the top level, you're actually pushing on a relatively open door.
Yes, and actually I think a lot of the time we convince ourselves that those people that we want to influence are not going to be, not going to be responsive to the things that we have to say. There's a lot of mythology surrounds the upper echelons of leadership in organisations, so we can't possibly go and talk to them. Whereas actually they're probably going to be very interested in ideas which are going to take the organisation to the place that they want it to be in. So finding out something useful about your stakeholders, assessing what's going to be of interest to them, and how can we play to those things that they're interested in.
Well, and also I think linked to that is a very conscious and well orchestrated process and program of getting access to the people you need to. So engaging with people through all sorts of different mechanisms.
And not necessarily in your network or in your usual sphere of influence. And
being comfortable that you can do that. That's quite important.
And working out, another element of our model is the prizes for each business. So what's in it for each business? Why should they care? What are they going to get out of coming on this journey and making the changes which are being talked about and envisioned? So
and one of the things that I think is really important in that aspect is that very often people, particularly those who come from a more of a workplace background, are dominated often by cost price, and things that are quite hard, metrics and so on. And I think what we've been able to do in our consulting work, and we bring to the pin, are some tools that help get underneath the skin of what actually the prize really is, because quite often we're finding these days that cost is probably 5 or 6 out of maybe 10 different
in terms of their priorities.
In terms of the leader's priority. They're often much more interested in productivity, much more interested in collaboration, innovation, getting the organisation to work as one, recruitment, retention, those sorts of things chime much more with the senior leaders. And so getting underneath the skin of that and trying to articulate the prize that agile working could bring is another interesting part which we cover in the paper.
Rather than just assuming everybody's going to be excited by the cost saving or a cost saving if there should happen to be one. It's tuning the case for change to the interests and the objectives and the drivers of each of your stakeholder groups or individual stakeholders.
Prizes.
It was what's going to work for all the stakeholders, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Right. So,
are you running?
Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, one of the prizes, one of the things that, in order to achieve some of those prizes, what we now need to do is integrate this idea of agile working into technology, strategy, property strategy, workplace strategy, HR strategy, and really linking these things closely so that we're not thinking necessarily about space in the same way as we used to. We're thinking about it. We're thinking about where people need to work and the way that they need to work, but we're not necessarily thinking about it in a one-to-one, I have this many people, I have that much space kind of way anymore.
It's the how we work round here strategy. Almost, isn't it?
So that has to be embraced within the property strategy, I think, doesn't it?
Yes. And I guess the final thing really is the continuation of all this good effort into the future, because a lot of people put a tremendous amount of energy into launching an initiative like this, but don't really either give themselves the time or bandwidth to think about how they're going to maintain things and adapt to changes in the future, either around the property, around their people strategies and the recruitment, retention, how they're going to induct people into this new way of working, how they're going to monitor the use of the workplace assets over time, and start to manage the the whole thing in a different way.
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, it's a bit like any change. If all we do is, apply change and then leave the organisation alone, you can be pretty sure that it'll go back to its own way of working. So for me,
Yes.
this business of what we call change maintenance, and this phase of the PIN transition model is really critical, because if you don't put that in place, all the great work that you've done leading up to that
Yes.
will
Can
just
unravel, can't it?
dissipate.
Yes.
And so there's a whole new discipline around managing the workplace, managing occupancy, ensuring that you've got the power bases covered. Instead of just having one sponsor, make sure you've got 3 or 4 sponsors. Recognise that there's a bunch of things that could come into play which may make this thing unfurl. And the trick is, we've done it a few times, you know which things you need to put in place.
Yes.
And it won't until, it has to be several years down the track, it just becomes the norm. But in that first 2 or 3 year period particularly, it seems to me that's when the change maintenance regime needs really to kick in, and that of course is the final part. So it's 9/10 of the model is associated with making the change, but then there's a really big part which is about maintaining that change going forward. And then the final thing I think we want to talk about really is the fact that of course our members go through, we use this model of course to structure and orientate the workshops, of which there are 5 or sometimes 6 a year. But then we also have the maturity model, which enables organisations to establish how well and how mature they are against each one of those different components within what we call our bricks in the wall model.
Yes.
And just as, we call it bricks in the wall model for a bit of fun, but the reason why we call it bricks in the wall model is because we've learned over the years that if any one of those bricks are weak, they can bring the whole wall down. And I think that's kind of quite an important thing to recognise. It's no good being 50% good here, 30% good there, 100% good.
Yes.
You need to be good in all of those
But the
aspects.
assessment helps the organisation to see where they are particularly weak
Exactly.
against a set of questions associated with each component of the wall.
Yeah.
So they can see where they might need to put in some energy and schedule that activity over the development of their case for change, their implementation, etc. But it gives them a much better sense of all of the things, and I suppose it highlights the risks that they run if they don't have those things in place. At least if they understand, then they'll perhaps be able to moderate the pace at which they're moving through the program.
Yeah. So that's the transition model, and those organisations around our table who are adopting that are finding, I think, that they're moving forward in a much more conscious and progressive way.
Gives them a lot more confidence.
More confidence. Perhaps they're not having to learn the lessons that others have already learned. It's shortcutting the processes for them, and making their implementation of Agile working much more likely to be enduring.
Yes, and adapting it to their own circumstances and situations as well.
Exactly.
Because there's no one set way of doing things. There's no set order. Organisations often ask us, well, that when we've explained the model, the framework, so what order do you do things in? And of course, there isn't a set order. Some organisations would enter in different places because of what they've done to date. So there isn't I suppose there is a right way.
There's a framework,
there's an ideal
but
way.
then there's a now. Of course, the kind of organisations and people who ought to be getting involved in the PIN are really those organisations that are either at the beginning of their journey, wanting to apply this idea and wanting to learn about it, because there's a lot to learn.
Yes.
Learn about it and how they can make moves forward and be quite innovative in the way they go about things. So the leaders from real estate, from workplace, from FM, HR, sometimes IT, leaders who have this desire to bring about this change in the way their organisation works. Really, those are the people who should be getting involved with the PIN. And if those people if there are people out there who want to do that, then they should email our good friend Will Corliss, wcorliss at advanced-workplace.com.
And of course, the members have are able to bring 2 or 3 representatives to each workshop, so that they can bring their colleagues from the other disciplines that they're collaborating with, which is what gives it a lot of its strength.
Well, the ideal team membership is somebody from IT, real estate, and HR, and working together as a kind of cohesive group. That's the best model for me, I think.
Yes. Okay.
So if you're interested in joining the PIN, get on the phone. We'll love to hear from you.
I'm sure that'll work.
Thank you. We're done.
Hello.